Welcome to the second episode of How My Chat Works, maybe. I don't know how to call this season thing. Today I wanted to show you how main.inc.php and main.js and login.js works. First, let's start with main.inc.php. We can close this here. And we go through every function and what it does and how it works. The first function is error. It's always the best if you handle errors. So in this way, here is an error function which takes errors and takes an value which is a boolean. It's normally true, otherwise it's false, and it will say if it will respond with the error, if it should be encrypted or not, which we will see later on the response function, which is on the one of the last functions of this file. The first thing we do is we take a backtrace, a debug backtrace, which means we take all data or all functions which are called before that, and I pop the last function which is called. Unset the file because it could lead to some vulnerability. Push the errors inside an array with the key error and push it inside key result. And if config debug equals true, we also array unshift the debug backtrace and respond with everything. As I said, we will cover this later. Now to the second function. The second function is a really important function. It's SQL query, which takes a string that's really important. It shouldn't take anything else, which is a query, and it takes a string or a variable, something like that, or an array, something like that, and pushes it inside params. The first thing we have to do is get MySQLi, the open connection to the MySQL server. In it, the STMT, so we prepare this whole thing, put the object into STMT. If it's not existing, we get an error back which is no SQL. Exist we will cover later as well. It's also a really important function which is used a lot of times. And if prepare doesn't work, it returns false. This is general happening. Another thing is if it's preparing, you have to push some question mark into the query, and as many question marks you have, this is the count of params which it takes, and if they are not the same, it leads to an error which we don't want, so before that I return false. Now we take the types of every param and push them before the params itself, and on the end call the function stmt, bind param, and then the params with the type before it inside this function. It will execute this whole thing, and after that gets the result into rows. If rows is not set, so it's not false, then it will be all data will be pushed as an array, just pushed in. Nothing really important. It's like if you say MySQL I minus more or equal, no, greater, equal or greater or equal, something like that. Query, and then fetch assoc, like you see here already. It just pushes all data which is getting SQL to PHP inside results as an array. then closes the connection, and then returns the result. So it's not that impressive of a function, but really important, because always you want to find something and you want to use a function which is really secure, which is this. Token gen is not the most important function, but really useful. It has a lot of things written inside, as you can see. There are 3 parts. If length is set and not empty, I could change this theoretically to exists. I noticed this right now. And it's not equal to 0, which is here. Then take length and just let it. And use it later to generate this hex token. And if not, take from conf the token length and use that instead, if something is wrong or broken. GetIP is a simple function which just takes the IP of the client, which is used to save it inside, for example, AC user. There's, for example, the IP, which is just a voucher of 15. It should be more, because it could be also IPv6, which is a lot longer and could break something. So I will change this soon. Then we have the most important function, exists. It takes a variable, an arrow, and encrypt. Backtraces also the functions, because maybe it calls itself here, and if it's an array in an array in an array, we don't want to check everything inside the array, maybe just the first step. So we just check if it's not calling itself. So otherwise it will just check if it's an array, then it will check everything in the first layer of the array and return false if it's not existing, else it will return true. If it's not an array, it will just pass on and check if vars, which is the variable set, is set and not empty. If yes, then return it. If not, it checks first if error is false. If it's not, it will return an error, which we have seen already up there. And encrypt is also, should it be encrypted? If yes, then yes. If not, then no. False. Yeah. Otherwise, it will be false, which is normally what it is. And so it will just return false. So if you just pass in the variable, you get just a true or a false and nothing else. The next function is a relatively easy one. It will check if the string, important, it's a string, which is assoc, true. If it's JSON, it will just tests the string and won't like push an arrow to the web page, which we don't want to, but just checks after it if last error is an error none, so it's no error. So, and if it's no error, it will just return the result. So just decodes the code already, so you don't have to decode it a second time. If not, it returns false. So you can just say is JSON, say data equals is JSON, blah blah blah. And if it's not false, you can continue and use data as JSON. And it's already decoded, so you have nothing to do. The next function also uses is JSON already. It's escape. I have to say I don't feel already good with this function. I think I will change it later. So if it will look different in your version of AlphaChat, which is also the chat I did. This is which I didn't say in the first episode. But if it looks different, don't worry. It just is not what I wanted here. So yeah. So it takes the JSON, which is just raw JSON, decodes it. There's a function which is really important, and this escapes. And this escapes just all values and keys, as you can see, of the JSON, and after that pushes it all into result. If it's not JSON, it just returns an error, which just says, okay, I can't escape it. I will change it, as I said already, because sometimes it's not JSON, but I still want to encode and escape it. I'm sorry. I want to escape it, so it would be bad if I couldn't escape it, because it's not JSON and just returns an error. So yeah, but otherwise it will just return the result. The next thing is some special function, which is really just used once, but I wanted to set it because maybe I have to use it later, because I'm not already done with the whole code. It takes a string as pattern and a string as subject, takes everything, every pattern, as a pattern itself, so it's an array. Which is weird, I noticed right now, because it's the string. But wait, we have one time when we use it. Oh no, we won't use it. Okay, this function will be deprecated, so let's make it a comment, because we don't use it anymore. The next, we just clip that. The next function is secure. This is the function which makes the connection secure. It makes a secret in hex, which is 16 bits, because it's 2 bytes. And it's true, but it's not set. Okay. And makes it to a hex string. Makes also the token, which is similar. Theoretically, I could just use token gen, but okay. After that, it generates a key, which just uses a secret, a key, and a prime. Now there are something you have to know before you continue here. I use Diffie-Hellman key exchange, which means you have 3 values. 2 are common on both sides, on client and server side. The first thing is the general key, which is used everywhere, and the prime, which is used everywhere. Then we have 2 secrets. One is from the server, one is from the client. I told already in the first episode that the server secret is just on the server and the client secret is just on the client side. And then you just generate a server key and a client key, send in both to each other, and then both use their secret again and use, instead of the general key, the server or client key to the power of the secret of them modulus the prime, and they both get the same secret, the same key, I'm sorry. And this is how they do it. I used a little library here with big int, which is here, which takes a key and how it's encoded. It's always hex, and makes mod power with the other data, then encodes it as hex as well and returns it. When it is returning the data, it will call the next function here, and then return just the data, as you can see. Now I have already explained a bit the chain key, but we have already some data as well. This is a multi-purpose chain key function. You can just push a secret inside and it will generate the key for the secret, which just is if key is false or prime is false, which is its default, it will use the general key and the prime, which is already set, and will just generate a key. Otherwise you can just push the other key or the other prime inside and it will generate the new key from a secret, your own key and your own prime, which is also really good if you want to make, for example, some calculation with different keys and secrets and primes. So you have a general function which you can use in different ways. Now we have AES key, which is just a function which saves the key data. It is not the securest way because you have the server secret and the client key, which makes it easy if you get this table from the database. You can generate every client server key and get all data theoretically. But this should be really impossible, so yeah. This is also a multi-purpose function. If you just push in the token, so secret and the client key, which is important, it's just the client key, not the server key. If it's just pushing in the token, which means it's false, it will just get you the secret and the key and returns it. Otherwise it will save it. So if you push everything inside, it will save it. Otherwise it will just push everything back. And it will also set as secure to the result. So if everything went good, this function should return true. Response is now the end function. This should always be called if you want to send something back to the client, but it's one of the last functions, so you should never call it before other code which should be executed before that or after that, because nothing will be executed after you call response. It takes also data and a boolean encrypt, takes the CS key, which is important, from the global space, checks if data is an array. It could be already encoded, so if it's not an array it just goes on. If not, it will make it encode to JSON and makes it JSON. And if it should be encrypted, which you have here as choice for yourself, so if you have, for example, a function which you want to implement, you just have to say data, comma, false, and it will just push the data to the client without encryption. And if CS key isn't existing, it will also just push the data out. If both are true, so it exists and encrypt is existing or true, not only existing, if it's true, it will encrypt the data with the key and make it to hex and then exits. And this is the main.inc.php file. To AES encrypt and somewhere AES decrypt, which is I think not here, we will talk about this later. Yeah. Let's go to JavaScript, to the client side, because we have to handle all requests and all data sent, and it should be formatted right so the server can understand what the client wants. So let's start on the beginning. It starts with an onload with an asynchronous function. and makes a configuration. So window.conf always contains the username of the user, a token of the user, and the AES key or AES object, yeah. And it contains some general data. I think this will be deleted in some way later, because that will be pushed to the functions and files themselves. For example, here you have the little window.conf.login, which contains some data, and we will cover that in some minutes. So this will be deleted later. Then it will init data. It's in a different function. It's in heads.php, which should be used to always generate the same head. And there you can push the data for everything. It has also some functions and some code to really find always the JavaScript files and to make the path right. And it will set also the general key and prime, so if you want to use them to make a key on the client side, you can use them because it's generated here in the init function. It also gives you a path of the route, so you know where you are. And it will make a request to get the JSON file, the language JSON file. And it won't encrypt it because it's not needed. So encrypt will be false. And then sets the main and error things and so on. And we will return the sources because this is really important. Maybe you don't want to download all JavaScript to the client because it's so much. So you can decide what you want to load. For example, if you have login, we'll just call the login thing and load just the login of that, which is handled here, as you can see. This is also handled in conf, in pconf scripts, which is in config.inc.php. So after that it returns the sources, looks if the source is an object, which is important, and takes every source, pushes it inside a script tag, and appends it to the head as the last element. Otherwise it will just uses the one script. If it's not an object, it should be only one, so it just makes it once, one script tag, and pushes it to the last element of script of head. Now we have also an arrow function. This is not really a function which I will define. This is a function which you can define as you want. For example, if you want to make a little banner of your website which is red, you can just write your code inside arrow, and every time an arrow is occurring, you can just call this function and it will display it as you want, as a little banner on top. Right now it will just return the data as log or alerted. We have also an exists in JavaScript. It's a bit different. It has to check some different values. It checks if it's an object. It's because arrays and objects in JavaScript are the same. So it just checks if it's an object. And something which is really important is if vars is, for example, an element, a DOM element, and you make it to a string, it includes HTML in some way. And if it's not included in HTML, it will continue here. And if vars is not equals null, which is also really important. Here it checks, as always, if the function is calling itself. If yes, it will continue will continue here downstairs. Downstairs. I don't know why I say this. But otherwise it will take the vars as v and checks everything as exists and pushes an error if something went wrong and returns false. So it does a lot. Or it returns true. Also a difference is in PHP you have just two functions, is set and not empty. In JavaScript we have three types. One way it shouldn't be empty, an empty string. Also not undefined and not null. Then it returns true. Otherwise it will check if error equals false. If yes, which is normally as default the thing, which returns the whole thing, returns just false. Otherwise it will call error and make you an error. As I said, you can just push whatever you want inside this function. Now we have the secure function as well here, which is really similar to the secure function in main. Down here. It's a lot longer than this because there we have no real like library. We just have normal code, and also this big int is not some library, it's just vanilla JavaScript. This function makes also a secret with crypto get random values because this is cryptographically secure. It makes just an 1 byte string, which is not that big. 2 bytes wouldn't really work here for some reason. I want to try it a bit, as you can see. And this makes after that a string, a hex string. Saves it first on the client side, so never delete it if you are a client and just watching my videos. I don't know why. So never delete this, because it saves all your messages and everything you have, and lets you decrypt it. Otherwise, you can't access your messages anymore. I thought about a system where you can like access the data anyway through your partner, which you're writing to, or your call group, which has the key. So yeah. It will also generate a key. It's also a multi-purpose function, but we go down later. So we'll generate a key, send this whole thing as data at action secure with the key to the server to make CS key, a server client key, client server key, and it will return this as data, but not the server client key itself, but just the server key and the token, and it will log this data. You can just delete this if you want. You can see I already wrote after delete, and it will show you, okay, there is this data and this data and this data, so you have all information, and after it returns the same data as well, which is after that used to make a key, a new key, the CS key itself, which is here. You can also put here the secret, the key, and the prime. If prime or key equals false, which is the default, it uses the config key and prime and makes it to a big int with the prefix, the prefix OS, which means it's an hex string, and makes it to a big int, and then uses it with a general just to the power of sec and modulo prime, makes the new key and returns it as hex string, And now we come to the most incredible function, I would say, and also the most used, because it's handling all requests and all communication to the server. It starts with data. You have also an URL. You can theoretically change this if you want to send data to a different URL, but normally it should be sent to system API.php. And you can also change if it should be encrypted. So if you don't want to encrypt anything, you can just set this to false. Here you can see it takes the key and every information it can get from the session storage, important. Oh, I noticed something. This is not really good. Takes the action which you send. You have to send them the action, the requests, and checks if action is set and if action is not equal to secure. If it is, it will just stringify this thing, this JSON, which should be JSON, and checks if it's encrypting. Otherwise it will just, as I said, just send the data. And then it will check exists everything. If something doesn't exist, it will call secure, which I already covered up there, and return the client secret, the server key, and the token. And this will after that generate a key, as you can see. And yeah, you can see the different use of it. Now you can push in this server key and the client secret and get the client server key, which is the key which is generally used. Yeah, it's in var because we have to use them later to decrypt also data, so don't worry about it. It will then use conf AES encrypts, stringify the data, and uses the general key for everything to encrypt it, makes it to a string, which is firstly binary shit, I have to say this, and makes it after that to a string, so to a hex string, so you can send it over the internet, because it could make problems if you don't send it as hex. I had problems with base64, so that's the reason why I use hex. And then it makes some XML HTTP requests. Theoretically you can also use fetch, but I like the old way of using the handler here. You can see there are some things also commented out. Those don't appear on your side of the client of the server or on your version of your chat, so don't worry about it. It will just call the function here down. There's just standard code. If you have some experience with JavaScript, you notice it's just simple, it's okay and everything is okay, and then it opens it if something gets wrong. But also I wrote some secondary code which is for a WebSocket. So if you, for example, don't want to use the general connection and always like send data and return data and this all the time, and make pull requests if this chat is already done and you're logged in and everything, but you want to use WebSocket, you can do that with this function too, because it checks first if vs WebSocket is set. If not, then it just continues with open, so it just makes a normal connection. Otherwise it will make an on message and sends the data and responds with data and so on and so on. And yeah. Oh, I just disconnected. What else? Yeah, and there we have the response handler. Those are the same for the WebSocket and also for the normal HTTP request, which takes just the response in both ways. Also sends the resolve function because it's not available inside this function, and just handles all information and data inside this one function and resolves it on the end. One way is to send a request a second time, or just when everything went okay, it just resolves it. Now the last 4 functions are relatively easy. The first is json.is. It's like the main.inc.php function is JSON, but as object, so it's not just function is JSON. So you can use it everywhere as well. And it's just trying to parse it. If it's not working, it returns false, otherwise it returns true. And there we have the string.prototype.toHex, which is also a function for every string, so you can use this to make every string to hex and every hex to string again. And it just takes data, decodes it if it's base64, splits everything, takes every character, decodes it, makes it to hex, and pushes it to an array. And after that it just is the data itself, and then it joins it everything, and this is all. So it makes just every string to an hex, mostly base64 strings. The other way around is to string, which takes the data as string, takes everything from the string itself as length, and has a for loop which takes 2 characters of the hex, takes a substring of it, passes it as string, because pass it as hex string, uses it as a code for string, and pushes it to data as string as well, and after that returns just the data. So this is it. And log is just a simple function which I wrote. It's just taking a name from the caller name, or anonymous if it has no value, and just console logs the name, which you can see here, anonymous, or here response handler, and after that just the data itself, which is for example here the error, or here what data is sent to the server. So this episode will be a bit longer as it looks like. I think let's stop here. Now I explained everything about main.js and main.inc.php, which is like the main functions of both programming languages. As you can see, there are a lot of similar things, and it handles similar things. So yeah, this is how those functions work. And in the next episode we will cover a bit of login.js or register.js. Not that much, because it's not ready already, like it's just in progress. I just want to push you to the level where I am, and after that maybe in 2 episodes I will show you how I did the language thing, like the error thing, how errors will be shown if they are in different languages and when and how. Yeah, but this we will cover later. So let's stop here. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you understood a bit of my code. And if you have suggestions, just write me on my webpage. Maybe you are right now on my website. alphachatdev.com. And if not, you can also write me a comment in YouTube, where you are maybe 2, and say, hey, maybe change this, or it's also open source. That I didn't say this in the first episode. A bit late, but yes, it's all open source, so everyone can send submissions and change code how they want, and it's all open source. So if you have a copy of the code itself, you can also change it for your general use. But I don't suggest you to change a lot of things, but sometimes it makes sense to change something. So, but if you have some problems, just write me on my chat, and I hope you enjoyed it at least. So maybe we see us in the third episode, I think. Yeah. So we see us later. Have a great day.